I never thought I'd find myself standing in the rain outside my son's apartment, suitcase in hand, heart pounding like I was a teenager on a first date instead of a 63-year-old woman. 23 hours of travel had left me exhausted, but excitement pushed the fatigue away. After 3 years without seeing him, I was finally here. Mom, Brandon's expression when he opened the door wasn't what I'd imagined during those long flights. Surprise, yes, but not the joyful kind. His eyes darted past me to the hallway, as if checking whether anyone had seen me arrive. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to surprise you," I said, my smile feeling suddenly stiff on my face. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, before stepping aside. "You should have called first." The apartment was modern and sleek, nothing like the warm, cluttered home we'd shared when he was growing up. No photos on the walls, no evidence of the boy who used to collect seashells and baseball cards. Everything was immaculate, like a hotel suite rather than a home. "Nice place," I said, setting my suitcase down carefully on the spotless hardwood floor. "I have a dinner meeting in an hour," he said, checking his watch. I wasn't expecting visitors. "I can wait here," I offered, trying to keep my voice light. "Or I could join you." His laugh was sharp, dismissive. "It's a business dinner, Mom. Look, this isn't a good time. I have a big presentation tomorrow and I need to focus. I traveled halfway around the world to see you, Brandon." The words came out before I could stop them. "I used my retirement savings for this trip." That made him pause, but not with guilt, with irritation. "That was your choice. I didn't ask you to come." We went to dinner anyway, at a restaurant so expensive I tried not to look at the prices. Brandon spent most of the meal on his phone, occasionally glancing up to ask perfunctory questions about my flight. "You know, your father would be proud of you," I said, trying to find some way to connect. "Building this life for yourself in a new country." "Dad would have understood the concept of boundaries," Brandon replied, not looking up from his screen, "and the importance of advance notice." The waiter brought our food, and we ate in silence for several minutes before Brandon finally set his phone down with a sigh. "Look, Mom, I don't mean to be harsh, but you can't just show up like this. My life is here now. I have responsibilities, a reputation to maintain. I'm your mother, not some embarrassing secret," I said quietly. "You should have called. I don't have room or time for your kind of drama." I just nodded, picking at my food while something cold and heavy settled in my chest. After Zachary died, Brandon had been my only family. I'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college, had supported his decision to move abroad, but sitting across from him now, I realized I barely recognized him. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I thought you'd be happy to see me." His expression softened slightly. "It's not that I'm not happy. It's just complicated. My life here is different." He glanced at his watch again. "Look, you can stay at my place tonight, but I have meetings all week. I'll help you find a hotel tomorrow." I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak without my voice breaking. Back at his apartment, he showed me to the guest room, a space so impersonal it might as well have had a number on the door, and disappeared into his home office. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror across the room. My face looked older than I remembered, lined with exhaustion and something else I didn't want to name. I opened my suitcase and took out the small wooden box I'd brought with me. Inside were the papers I'd been saving to show Brandon in person, the deed to my sister's estate, the inheritance that had shocked me as much as it would surprise him. Caroline and I hadn't spoken in years before her unexpected death, but she'd left everything to me. 3 properties in the rapidly developing coastal area where we'd grown up, now worth a small fortune. I'd kept it quiet, planning to share the news with Brandon face to face, to discuss how this sudden wealth could help us both. But now, looking at the cold, sterile room around me, I slipped the box back into my suitcase. Something had changed, or perhaps it had always been this way, and I'd been too blinded by love to see it. I took out my phone and called Anthony, my sister's attorney who had been helping me manage the inheritance. "I'd like to make some changes to our plans," I said quietly when he answered. "Everything okay, Cora?" he asked. "Did you meet with your son?" "Yes," I said, staring at the closed office door across the hall. and I've made a decision. I'd like to proceed with the foundation idea we discussed. All of it. The properties, the investments. I want them to go there. None for Brandon? Anthony asked carefully. You were pretty set on him getting at least the beach house. Plans change, I replied, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Sometimes people do too. After the call, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the lights of the unfamiliar city and thinking about the choices that had brought me here. By morning, I had made up my mind. Brandon was already dressed for work when I emerged from the guest room, his attention on his tablet as he sipped his coffee. I've booked myself a flight home for tomorrow, I told him. He looked up, relief evident in his eyes. That's probably for the best. I'll help you find a hotel for tonight. No need, I said. I've already found one. Mom, about last night. It's fine, Brandon, I interrupted. I understand now. What I didn't tell him was what else I understood. That the time had come to build a life that wasn't centered around waiting for my son's approval or attention. I had resources now, opportunities I'd never imagined possible, and they were mine to use as I chose. I was already mentally drafting the press release that Anthony would issue about the new charitable foundation being established with my inheritance, the one that would make the local news back home, and, I suspected, eventually find its way to Brandon's newsfeed. As I wheeled my suitcase toward the door, I paused. One more thing, Brandon, I said, turning to face him. Thank you. For what? He asked, confusion replacing the relief on his face. For helping me see things clearly. I closed the door behind me, stepping out into the morning sunshine with a strange, unexpected feeling of lightness. The hurt was still there, of course. It would be for a long time. But something else was growing alongside it. The first fragile shoots of freedom and the dawning realization that at 63, I might finally have the chance to discover who Cora Parker could become when she stopped living for someone else. What I didn't know then was that my decision that morning would set in motion events that would change both our lives forever, and that the next time Brandon called me, everything would be different. 3 months after my disastrous trip to see Brandon, I stood on the wooden deck of what had once been my sister Caroline's beach house, watching the sunset paint the ocean gold. The warm coastal breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine, so different from the sterile air of Brandon's apartment. Mrs. Parker, they're ready for you. I turned to see Megan, my assistant, a concept that still felt strange, waiting by the French doors. Behind her, I could see the living room filled with people. Local officials, potential donors, and community members, all gathered for the official launch of the Parker Family Foundation. Just one more minute, I said, taking a deep breath. When Anthony had first explained the extent of Caroline's inheritance, I'd been overwhelmed. 3 properties. This beach house, a commercial building downtown that housed several thriving businesses, and 10 acres of undeveloped land that developers had been eyeing for years. The total value was just over $4 million. A fortune I'd never imagined possessing. My initial instinct had been to share it with Brandon. Now that money was being channeled into scholarships for single parents, housing assistance for seniors, and community development projects. The irony wasn't lost on me. My sister, who had lived alone and kept to herself, was now helping build connections for others. As I stepped inside to address the crowd, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I barely recognized myself in the elegant blue dress, with my hair styled and a touch of makeup enhancing my features. For years, I'd dressed for practicality, for a life of budgeting and overtime shifts. Now, I looked like someone who belonged in this beautiful house, speaking to a room of influential people. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. When my sister Caroline left me this unexpected gift, I knew it came with responsibility, not just to preserve her legacy, but to create something meaningful with it. The speech went well. Anthony had helped me prepare. And afterward, as people mingled and discussed potential partnerships, I felt a strange sense of belonging. These weren't just wealthy donors or officials. They were people who cared about the same issues I'd spent my life worrying about: affordable housing, education opportunities, community support. You're a natural at this, said a deep voice behind me. I turned to find myself face to face with a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes. He looked vaguely familiar. "Joseph Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I was your sister's neighbor." "Of course," I said, shaking his hand. "Caroline mentioned you in her letters." What I didn't say was that she'd described him as the persistent widower next door who brings me tomatoes from his garden, even though I've told him a dozen times I don't like tomatoes. "She was a private person," he said with a smile that suggested he understood exactly what Caroline would have said about him. "But she cared about this place. She would have approved of what you're doing." "I hope so," I replied. "We weren't close at the end." "She talked about you more than you might think," Joseph said. "She kept the newspaper clipping about your teaching award on her fridge." The revelation caught me off guard. Caroline and I had drifted apart after our parents died, our occasional phone calls becoming increasingly perfunctory. I'd had no idea she'd followed my modest career achievements. "I didn't know that," I said quietly. "There's a lot people don't say until it's too late," Joseph replied. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask if you'd join me for coffee sometime. I could tell you more about Caroline's last years here." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my clutch bag. I excused myself, expecting it to be Megan with a question about the event. Instead, Brandon's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Brandon." "Mom," he said, his voice oddly tight. "I just saw the news." "What news?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "The foundation. Your inheritance. Why didn't you tell me?" I stepped out onto the deck again, away from the noise of the gathering. I tried to, actually. "I brought the papers with me when I came to visit." "And you decided not to because I was busy with work?" His tone was incredulous. "That's a bit extreme, don't you think?" "It wasn't that you were busy, Brandon," I said, surprising myself with my calmness. "It was that you made it very clear I wasn't a priority in your life. So I made some new priorities in mine. $4 million worth of priorities?" Now there was an edge to his voice. "That's family money, Mom." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And I'm using it to help families. Just not ours." "I'm your only family," he said, and for the first time, I heard a note of hurt beneath the anger. "You made that clear when you told me you didn't have room for me," I replied. "In your home or your life? That's not fair. I was stressed about work. You can't punish me forever for one bad day." "I'm not punishing you, Brandon. I'm making choices about my life and my inheritance." "Our inheritance," he corrected. "Aunt Caroline would have wanted me to have something." The opportunism in his tone made something harden inside me. "Caroline never even met you as an adult. You refused to come to her funeral, if you recall." "I was in the middle of finals." "We all make choices," I interrupted. "I've made mine." After we hung up, I stood gripping the deck railing, trying to process the conversation. Part of me felt guilty. Wasn't this exactly what mothers weren't supposed to do? Hold grudges? Withhold support? But another part, the part that had lain awake in that cold guest room and decided to take control of my life, felt vindicated. "Everything okay?" Joseph had appeared in the doorway, concern evident on his face. "Family complications," I said with a rueful smile. "Ah, the worst kind." He nodded sympathetically. "Still up for that coffee sometime?" In that moment, looking at his kind eyes and genuine smile, I made another choice about my new life. "Actually, yes, I'd like that." 2 days later, over coffee at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, Joseph told me stories about Caroline that painted a picture of a woman I'd never fully known. Her quiet generosity to local causes, her dry sense of humor, her extensive knowledge of native coastal plants. "She talked about you often," Joseph said. "How you were the brave one, going after what you wanted. The teaching career, the family. We saw each other as having such different lives," I mused. "But looking back, maybe we were more similar than either of us realized." "She would have loved to see you take charge like this," he said, gesturing toward the foundation brochure I'd brought along. "It suits you." As we parted ways, promising to meet again the following week, my phone lit up with a notification. It was an email, sent to the foundation's public address but clearly meant for me personally. Cora, I've been doing some research into your foundation and its legal structure. There appear to be several irregularities regarding the transfer of Caroline's estate that my lawyers would be very interested in exploring. Before things escalate, I suggest we meet to discuss a more equitable division of what is, by any reasonable standard, a family inheritance. I'll be in town next week. Let me know when we can talk. Brandon. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking slightly. The implied threat was clear, as was the calculating opportunism behind it. This wasn't about family connection or even hurt feelings. This was about money. What Brandon didn't know was that in the 3 months since I'd returned home, I hadn't just been planning foundation events and getting makeovers. I'd been working closely with Anthony to ensure every aspect of the inheritance transfer and foundation establishment was legally airtight. Caroline's will had been explicit, and we'd followed every proper procedure. But as I walked back to my car, the beautiful day now shadowed by my son's threat, I realized that this wasn't really about legal technicalities. It was about power. And for the first time in our relationship, I held it. The question was, what would I do with it? And how far was Brandon willing to go to challenge me? He can't actually do anything legally, Anthony assured me, sliding Brandon's printed email back across his desk. Caroline's will is clear, and you've followed every regulation in establishing the foundation. We were sitting in Anthony's downtown office, the view of the harbor visible through the large windows behind him. Outside, it was a perfect spring day, but inside, my stomach was in knots. But he could drag this out in court, I said. Create bad publicity for the foundation just as we're getting started. Anthony leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. He could try. But Cora, there's something you should know about Caroline's will that I haven't told you yet. I tensed. What is it? Caroline anticipated something like this might happen. She included a specific clause. If anyone contests the will or attempts to claim a portion of the inheritance against your wishes, they forfeit any potential future claim. What do you mean? I mean that right now. While Brandon has no legal claim to the inheritance, you could theoretically choose to give him something in the future. But if he pursues legal action and loses, which he would, that option is permanently off the table. I sat back, absorbing this information. It seemed Caroline had understood family dynamics better than I'd given her credit for. So what do I do? I asked. That depends, Anthony said gently, on what you want the outcome to be. That question stayed with me as I drove to meet Brandon the next day. What did I want? Part of me, the part that remembered the little boy who'd once followed me everywhere, proudly declaring, "My mommy is the best teacher in the whole world," wanted reconciliation. But another part, the woman who had stood alone in a foreign city, realizing how little she mattered to her only child, wanted justice, or at least accountability. We'd agreed to meet at a small restaurant near the beach house. I arrived early, choosing a table with a view of the ocean, and ordered a cup of tea to steady my nerves. When Brandon walked in, I was struck by how out of place he looked in his expensive suit among the casual beach crowd. He spotted me and headed over, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he said, sitting down across from me. "Brandon," I replied. "You look well." A waitress approached, but he waved her away. "I'd prefer to get straight to business." "Of course." I took a sip of my tea, noting how he'd positioned his briefcase on the table between us like a shield. "I got your email." "Then you know my concerns," he said, his tone professionally detached. "I've consulted with several attorneys who specialize in inheritance law. They believe I have a strong case as Caroline's only nephew." "And what exactly are you hoping to achieve with this strong case?" I asked. "A fair division of assets," he replied immediately. "The beach house and a portion of the liquid assets would be reasonable. You could keep the foundation and the other properties." I studied him across the table. This man who shared my blood but suddenly seemed like a stranger. There was no mention of family connections, no acknowledgement of the hurt he'd caused, just a businesslike proposal to divide assets. "And if I refuse? Then I'll be forced to challenge the will in court," he said calmly. "It would be public, of course. Probably generate some local media interest, especially given the foundation's profile." The implied threat was clear. He'd create a scandal, tarnish the foundation's reputation before it really got started. I see, I said. And have your attorneys explain to you what happens if you contest the will and lose. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. What do you mean? There's a no contest clause, I explained. If you challenge the will and lose, which Anthony assures me you would, you permanently forfeit any potential future claim to any part of the inheritance. Right now, I could legally choose to give you something in the future. If you pursue this, that door closes forever. He hadn't known. I could see it in the way his confidence faltered, if only for a moment. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Check with your attorneys, I replied. They'll confirm it. Brandon's jaw tightened as he reassessed his position. This isn't like you, Mom. Using legal technicalities to keep everything for yourself. And threatening your mother with a lawsuit is like you? I countered, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. When did you become this person, Brandon? When did you become someone who cuts off her only son over one bad weekend? He shot back. It wasn't just one weekend, I said quietly. It was years of canceled visits, forgotten birthdays, and calls that got shorter and shorter. It was me slowly realizing that I was the only one trying to maintain our relationship. So, this is punishment. No, I shook my head. This is me finally accepting reality and making choices based on it. I wanted to share this inheritance with you, Brandon. I brought the papers with me when I visited, but you showed me exactly where I stood in your life, and I decided to put my energy elsewhere. He leaned back, studying me with new eyes. You've changed. I've grown, I corrected. There's a difference. We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from other tables emphasizing the tension at ours. So what now? He finally asked, and for the first time, I heard uncertainty in his voice. That depends on what you really want, I said. If it's just money, then I suggest you walk away. The foundation is established, the legal structures are in place, and you would lose a court challenge. And if it's not just about money? His tone was guarded. I took a deep breath. Then that's a different conversation. But it needs to start with honesty, not threats. Brandon glanced down at his briefcase, then back at me. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. What if I wanted to understand? He asked. About Caroline? About what you're doing with the foundation? What if I wanted to reconnect? It was the opening I'd been waiting for, a crack in the wall he'd built between us. But years of disappointment had taught me caution. Then I'd suggest we start small, I said. Maybe dinner tomorrow night. No briefcases, no lawyers, just conversation. He nodded slowly. I could do that. As he left, earlier than planned, claiming he needed to make some calls, I remained at the table, watching the waves roll in. I wasn't naive enough to believe one conversation had changed everything. Brandon's initial reaction to the inheritance had revealed a calculating side I couldn't simply forget. My phone chimed with a text message from Joseph. How did it go with your son? I smiled, appreciating his thoughtfulness. He'd offered to come with me today, but I'd known this was something I needed to handle alone. Complicated, I texted back, but I'm standing my ground. Good for you, came his quick reply. Still on for dinner Friday? Absolutely, I responded, feeling a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with foundations or inheritances. Later that evening, as I sat on the deck watching the sunset, Megan called with news. Cora, we've been approached by the Coastal Conservation Group, she said excitedly. They're interested in partnering on the undeveloped acreage. They want to create a nature preserve with educational programs for local schools. That sounds perfect, I said, thinking how much Caroline would have approved. Set up a meeting next week. After we hung up, I noticed an email notification on my phone. It was from Brandon, sent to my personal address this time, not the foundation's. Mom, I've consulted with my attorneys about what you said. They confirmed the no contest clause. I'm withdrawing any potential legal challenge. About dinner tomorrow. There's someone I'd like you to meet. My fiancée, Sophia. She's been encouraging me to repair things with you. I didn't tell her about our situation when I came here, and she was disappointed in me when she found out. Would it be all right if she joined us? Brandon, I read the email twice, trying to understand what had changed. A fiancé? Brandon had never mentioned being in a serious relationship, let alone an engagement. And she wanted him to reconcile with me? As I was contemplating how to respond, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Parker, this is Sophia Mitford, Brandon's fiancée. I hope you don't mind me calling like this. Her voice was warm, with a slight accent I couldn't place. She sounded young but confident. Not at all, I said, surprised. Brandon just mentioned you in an email. Yes, well, she paused. I wanted to speak with you directly. There are some things about Brandon's situation that I think you should know before you meet tomorrow. Things he may not tell you himself. Brandon's company is failing, Sophia said, her voice low and clear through the phone. He hasn't admitted it to anyone, but they've lost their major clients, and he's been covering expenses with personal loans for months. I sank into a chair, processing this revelation. And he came here when he found out about the inheritance. Yes, Sophia confirmed. But please understand, Mrs. Parker, I didn't know any of this when he left. He told me he was going to visit you to make amends. I only learned the truth when I found the legal research on his laptop. How long have you been together? I asked, trying to reconcile this new information. 2 years, she replied. We met at a charity event in Singapore. I'm an environmental engineer, she added, as if that explained something important. And you're really engaged? Her laugh was warm, genuine. Yes, though he didn't plan to tell you yet. That was my insistence. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time, but Brandon always had excuses. The pieces were starting to fit together. Brandon's financial desperation, his sudden interest in reconciliation after learning about the no contest clause, and now this fiancé who seemed surprisingly forthright. Why are you telling me this? I asked directly. Because I love your son, she said simply. And I believe that solving problems starts with truth, not manipulation. Brandon needs to face consequences, but he also needs a chance to be better. I thought you should have all the facts before deciding anything. After we hung up, I sat on the deck for a long time, watching the stars emerge over the ocean. The situation was more complicated than I'd imagined. Brandon wasn't just being opportunistic, he was desperate. And Sophia's intervention suggested there might be more to him than the calculating figure who had threatened legal action. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant early again, this time choosing a quiet table in the corner. I watched the door, curious about the woman who had been honest enough to call me. They arrived together, Brandon looking tense in a casual button-down shirt, alongside a striking young woman with short black hair and intelligent eyes. When she saw me, Sophia smiled warmly and stepped forward with extended hands. Mrs. Parker, it's so good to finally meet you. Please call me Cora, I said, taking her hands in mine. They were warm and her grip was firm. Brandon hung back slightly, his expression guarded. Mom. Dinner began awkwardly, with careful small talk about the weather and the coastal town. Sophia carried most of the conversation, asking thoughtful questions about my teaching career and the foundation's work. The educational programs you're developing sound incredible, she said enthusiastically. It's exactly the kind of community engagement I specialized in back in Singapore. Brandon remained mostly silent, watching our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't until the main course arrived that Sophia turned to him with a gentle but firm look. Brandon, I think it's time we discussed what we talked about. He set down his fork, jaw tightening. Sophia, your mother deserves the truth, she insisted quietly. The look that passed between them spoke volumes. Her encouragement, his reluctance, and some unspoken agreement. Brandon turned to me, his professional facade finally cracking. Mom, I've been dishonest with you. About the company? I asked, deciding to lay my cards on the table. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed as he glanced at Sophia, who met his gaze steadily. Yes, he admitted. We're on the verge of bankruptcy. I've been trying to save it for months, taking out personal loans, missing payroll. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. When I saw the news about your inheritance, I thought it was the solution. I thought I was entitled to it. And now? I asked. Now I realize I handled everything wrong, he said. With the company, with you. Sophia helped me see that. Sophia reached over to squeeze his hand. Tell her the rest. Brandon hesitated, then continued. The weekend you visited, it wasn't just work stress. I'd just found out our biggest client was pulling their contract. I was about to lose everything I'd built. When you showed up unexpectedly, He trailed off. You took it out on me. I finished for him. Yes, he admitted. And I've been too proud to apologize properly. Too ashamed of what I've become. I studied my son's face, seeing beyond the polished exterior to the desperate man beneath. There was genuine remorse there, but also the same stubbornness I'd seen in him since childhood. And what about the legal threats? I asked. Was that just a desperate attempt to save your company? Partly, he acknowledged, but it was also anger. Finding out about the inheritance that way, seeing you transform your life while mine was falling apart. I felt betrayed. The way I felt standing in the rain outside your apartment, I said quietly. Something shifted in his expression then. Recognition, perhaps even understanding. I know an apology isn't enough, he said. But for what it's worth, I am sorry. For how I treated you when you visited, and for threatening you with legal action. I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. The hurt and disappointment of the past several months couldn't be erased with one conversation, but the man sitting across from me was still my son. And now I understood that, like me, he was at a crucial turning point in his life. Thank you for your honesty, I said finally. It's a start. As the dinner continued, the conversation gradually became more natural. Sophia talked about her work in sustainable development, her eyes lighting up as she described a restoration project she'd led in Malaysia. Brandon shared stories about their life in Singapore that revealed a side of him I hadn't seen in years. His passion for architectural preservation, his volunteer work teaching English to migrant workers. That sounds like something your father would have done, I said, surprised. Brandon smiled, a genuine smile that reminded me of the boy he'd once been. I think about him a lot, actually, especially lately. As the evening wound down, Sophia excused herself to take a business call, tactfully giving us a moment alone. She's remarkable, I said, watching her walk toward the restaurant entrance. She is, Brandon agreed. She's the one who insisted I tell you everything, who booked her own flight to come here when she found out what I was planning. He shook his head. I don't deserve her. Maybe not, I said honestly. But sometimes we get chances we don't deserve. The question is what we do with them. He looked at me directly, vulnerability plain on his face. The company's going to fold. I can't stop it now. I don't know what comes next. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. An admission of failure, of uncertainty. The boy who had always needed to appear perfect was finally acknowledging his imperfections. You'll start over, I said. People do it all the time. I don't know how, he admitted. I thought about my own journey over the past few months, the fear and uncertainty I'd faced, the new identity I was building. You figure it out day by day, and you don't do it alone. When Sophia returned, she brought with her a gentle energy that seemed to ease the tension between us. As we prepared to leave, she touched my arm lightly. I hope we can spend more time together while we're here, she said. Brandon mentioned you're having a foundation event this weekend? Yes, I said. A fundraiser for the scholarship program. It's at the beach house. We'd love to come, she said, looking at Brandon expectantly. If that's all right with you, he added hesitantly. I nodded, not yet ready to fully embrace reconciliation, but willing to open the door to possibility. I'd like that. Later that night, as I sat on the deck with a cup of tea, my phone chimed with a message from Joseph. How was the dinner? Enlightening, I replied. Still processing. Want company? He offered. I considered for a moment. Yes, actually. I could use a friend right now. 20 minutes later, Joseph arrived with a bottle of wine and a patient ear. As we sat under the stars, I told him everything. Brandon's financial troubles, Sophia's intervention, the complicated emotions I was sorting through. It's a lot to take in, he said when I finished. What are you thinking of doing? I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to help him, but another part wonders if that would just enable more of the same behavior. Joseph nodded thoughtfully. You know, Caroline faced a similar dilemma once. What do you mean? Your sister had a business partner who betrayed her trust, cost her a lot of money, he explained. Years later, this same person came back, desperate for help. Caroline was torn. What did she do? I asked, curious about this side of my sister I'd never known. She created conditions, Joseph said. She offered help, but with clear expectations and boundaries. It wasn't about punishment. It was about rebuilding trust. As I contemplated his words, my phone lit up with an email notification. It was from Anthony. Cora, you asked me to keep you informed about any inquiries regarding the foundation. A reporter from the Business Journal contacted us today asking questions about your son's visit and potential family conflicts over the inheritance. I didn't provide any comments, of course, but thought you should know. Call me tomorrow if you want to discuss how to handle this. Anthony. I showed the email to Joseph, a knot forming in my stomach. Someone's talking to the press. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The question is who, Joseph said, his expression troubled. And why now? Just when Brandon seemed to be coming clean. I stared out at the dark ocean, the peaceful evening suddenly disturbed by new suspicions and uncertainties. Had Brandon's apparent honesty been just another manipulation? Was this press inquiry his backup plan if direct threats didn't work? Or was there someone else who might benefit from creating conflict between us? The foundation fundraiser was in full swing by the time Brandon and Sophia arrived. The beach house glowed with string lights, and the sound of conversation and laughter drifted out to the deck where guests mingled, champagne glasses in hand. I was in the middle of a conversation with the mayor when I spotted them. Brandon looked uncomfortable in the crowd, but Sophia moved confidently beside him, her hand reassuringly on his arm. "Excuse me," I said to the mayor, making my way toward them. "Cora," Sophia greeted me warmly with a quick hug. "This is wonderful. The turnout is amazing." "Thank you," I said, then turned to Brandon. "I'm glad you both could make it." He nodded stiffly. "Could we talk privately for a minute?" My stomach tightened. "Of course. We can use the study." As we walked through the crowded living room, I caught Joseph's eye across the space. He gave me a questioning look, and I nodded slightly to let him know everything was all right. Once in the study, Brandon closed the door and turned to me. "Did you talk to the press about me?" The accusation caught me off guard. "Of course not. Why would you think that?" "Because someone from the Business Journal called me this morning asking for comments about my failed company and desperate attempt to claim my aunt's inheritance," he said, his voice tight with anger. Their exact words. I shook my head. "I received an email from Anthony saying a reporter had contacted the foundation about family conflicts, but I assumed you might have—" I stopped myself. "What? Leaked it myself?" Brandon's laugh was bitter. "Why would I want that kind of story out there? It would destroy whatever professional reputation I have left." We stared at each other, the realization dawning simultaneously. "If neither of us contacted the press," I began. "Then who did?" Brandon finished. The answer came to me suddenly, along with a memory of a conversation at the foundation launch event. "I think I know." Just then, there was a knock at the door. Sophia peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here asking specifically to speak with both of you." "A Mr. Victor Reeves?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Victor had been Caroline's business partner years ago, the same one Joseph had mentioned, who had betrayed her trust. "Tell him we'll be right out," I said, turning back to Brandon. "We need to present a united front. Can we set aside our suspicions for now and deal with this together?" Brandon hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." Victor was waiting on the deck, a champagne glass in his manicured hand, looking much the same as I remembered from Caroline's funeral, expensively dressed, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Cora," he greeted me smoothly. "And this must be Brandon. I've heard so much about you." "From whom?" Brandon asked directly. Victor's smile widened. "People talk in small towns, especially when there's money involved." "What do you want, Victor?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Just to offer my services," he said. "I specialize in real estate development, as you may know. That undeveloped acreage Caroline left you would be perfect for a luxury resort. I have investors ready to make an offer that would benefit everyone. The foundation is partnering with the Coastal Conservation Group for that land, I said. It's going to be a nature preserve. Victor's expression hardened slightly. A waste of potential. Caroline would have understood the economic value. Caroline understood value better than you give her credit for, I countered. And I'm curious. Did you reach out to the business journal about our family business? He took a sip of champagne, his eyes calculating. Information finds its way to the right people. A public dispute over the inheritance might encourage a more practical approach to its management. Brandon stepped forward. So you thought you could manipulate a family rift for your financial gain? Business opportunity, Victor corrected. And let's be honest, the rift was already there. I merely highlighted it. Well, you've miscalculated, I said firmly. There is no rift for you to exploit anymore. Victor's gaze moved between us, reassessing. So touching. A family reunion. But Brandon, are you really content with nothing while your mother controls millions? Your business is failing. You need this. It was a last, desperate attempt to sow discord, and for a moment, I tensed, wondering if Brandon would waver. Instead, he straightened his shoulders. My business decisions are my responsibility, not my mother's, and certainly not yours. Victor's smile disappeared entirely. You're making a mistake, both of you. No, I said. Caroline made one mistake, trusting you. We won't repeat it. As Victor stalked away, Brandon turned to me with a surprised expression. That was the truth, I finished for him. Something I've been learning to embrace lately. Later, after most of the guests had departed, Brandon, Sophia, Joseph, and I sat on the deck with glasses of wine. The tension of the confrontation with Victor had faded, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of connection. So, what happens now? Brandon asked. With your business, I mean. It's over, he admitted, his voice steady. Bankruptcy proceedings start next week. What will you do? I asked. Sophia reached for his hand. We've been talking about that. I've been offered a position with an environmental restoration project here on the coast. And I'm considering options, Brandon added. Something smaller scale, more aligned with what I really care about. Architectural preservation, maybe. Starting over, I said, echoing our conversation from the restaurant. He nodded. It's terrifying and liberating. I recognized the feeling, the same one I'd experienced walking away from his apartment months ago, stepping into an uncertain but authentic future. I have a proposal, I said carefully. The Foundation has been discussing establishing a historical preservation program, focusing on renovating significant buildings in town for community use. We need someone with architectural expertise to consult. Brandon looked up sharply. Mom, you don't have to. This isn't charity, I interrupted. It's a legitimate need, and you have the skills. It would be part-time initially with a modest consulting fee. If it works out, we could discuss something more permanent. It's a good idea, Joseph added. The old library building needs someone who understands both preservation and modern functionality. Brandon was quiet for a moment, looking out at the ocean. I'd need to finish up things in Singapore first, and I'd want to earn the position, not just have it handed to me. Of course, I agreed. Anthony can draw up a proper contract with clear expectations and deliverables. Like Caroline's conditions, Joseph murmured, smiling slightly at me. As the conversation shifted to Sophia's work and the couple's plans to relocate, I found myself watching Brandon. There was something different about him, a humility I hadn't seen before, mixed with a quiet determination that reminded me of Zachary. Later, as Joseph and I walked along the beach under the stars, I tried to process everything that had happened. You're rebuilding a relationship with your son, Joseph observed. That's no small thing. We're trying, I agreed. It's complicated, but worth the effort. And the foundation work is going well. Caroline would be proud. I nodded, thinking about my sister, how little I'd understood her in life, and how much I was learning about her in death. I wish I'd known her better. You know, Joseph said thoughtfully, in some ways you're carrying on her legacy in a way she never could. She was brilliant with money and property, but connecting with people was harder for her. That was one thing we had in common, I admitted. I spent decades focused solely on Brandon and my students. I never really built a life beyond that. And now? Joseph asked, his hand warm in mine. Now I'm learning, I said, smiling up at him. Day by day. 1 year later, I stood at the podium at the grand opening of the Parker Community Arts Center, formerly the town's abandoned library, now beautifully restored under Brandon's guidance. The audience included local officials, foundation supporters, and community members excited about the new music programs, art studios, and performance spaces. This project represents what the Parker Family Foundation stands for, I said, looking out at the crowd. Not just preserving our past, but building our future together. My gaze found Brandon and Sophia in the front row, their 3-month-old daughter asleep in Sophia's arms. Beside them sat Joseph, who gave me an encouraging nod. My sister Caroline understood the value of property, I continued. But what I've discovered this past year is that our true inheritance isn't measured in real estate or bank accounts. It's found in the connections we nurture, the trust we rebuild, and the communities we create. After the ceremony, as we gathered for photos, Brandon leaned in to speak quietly in my ear. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said, "even when I deserved it." "That's the thing about family," I replied, watching as Joseph gently took the baby from Sophia so she could join us. The real inheritance is invisible. You can't measure it or count it or spend it. But once you recognize it, you realize it's been there all along. Later that evening, as Joseph and I sat on the deck of what was now our shared home, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he said, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "And I think this is it." As I said yes, with the sound of the ocean as our witness, I thought about the unexpected journey of the past 18 months. From the lonely woman standing in the rain outside her son's apartment to this moment of quiet joy and connection. Caroline's inheritance had transformed my life, but not in the ways anyone might have predicted. The money and properties had opened doors, certainly. But the true value had been in the journey itself, the challenges that had forced me to grow, the conflicts that had led to deeper understanding, and the courage to build a life not centered on what I had lost, but on what I had found. And in that discovery lay the most precious inheritance of all, the knowledge that at 64, Cora Parker's story was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning.